Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Atomic, and I'm here to tell you the official timeline of one of my proudest creations and what it took to make it. In an age where all things visual just about dominate the entertainment world, both big and small, creating something entertaining within your means can be pretty damn frustrating, especially when you can't hire your own cast and crew to actually make a film. But here you are, a million ideas in your head and practically no way to get them out there for the world to see. Maybe you're too young to be a shot caller, or, and more importantly, you're too broke to put together such a thing. At the time, I was definitely a combination of both, but I was aware of just one format that I could actually create something within my means, the audio format. Sure, I may be half 100 years too late to jump on that craze, but before television, radio was basically the only way to listen to a story. Podcasts are an absolutely massive form of entertainment these days, so maybe actually listening to something instead of watching was worth a shot. So years ago, I pulled the trigger on making one of my own. Who knows, maybe it will pick up some steam and evolve into visual entertainment over time. Either way, it was my only chance of getting ideas out there. Kind of still is. I'm an enormous Fallout fan, one of the biggest you'll meet. So my sights were set on something in that category. There have been tons of fan-made creations around the series, machinimas, fan films, mods, and all that jazz, so why not create a Fallout radio show? You might be wondering where all this came from, and I'm sure fans of what I've made would love to hear this. So here's how one Fallout fan grew an interesting rendition of a Fallout show, which later turned into a series, and how it actually performed. But before I begin, break the thumb of that like button and be sure to subscribe. It was odd. I was sitting in my health class in 2014 and waiting for the teacher to come in. At the time, I was listening to an online 40 station on my phone. This was only a few months before I made A-Bomb Radio. When Charlie Spivak's 1944 song Let Me Love You Tonight came on, and the intro alone sparked an odd idea in my head. Basically, the intro of the song sounded like an instrumental to a vintage radio show. The part where the enthusiastic announcer would read off the title and the name of the episode. It was then that I kept running the scenario in my head over and over. I began thinking of titles and character names as that song played, and I couldn't quite come up with anything. But I thankfully typed the song down on my phone so I could always replay it on YouTube later on. Can't exactly tell you why I was doing it at the time. I never intended to take this brainstorm anywhere, but I was onto something. What happened next probably took place a few weeks later. At this point, I had already put together A-Bomb Radio, which at the time was called Radio Wasteland, and I distinctly remember sitting alone in my game room typing away at something. I don't know if I happened to be listening to an early rendition of my radio station or just listening to Let Me Love You Tonight on repeat again, but the song was playing regardless. I just couldn't wrap my brain around what concept of radio show I was trying to formulate. If I was going to make one, what would it be? Where would it take place? Fallout, Bioshock, the real world, and what would it be about? Well, narrowing it down, let's remind ourselves that this was all happening during those legendary hype days when the gaming community as a whole was clamoring for every scrap of Fallout 4 news it could get its hands on, even me. Fake websites, cryptic messages, and vague rumors about the next Fallout title dominated the internet, and the excitement was real. Pretty much, it was just a great time to be a Fallout fan, so Fallout the show shall be. Still, no name, barely a concept, and only a 75-year-old song. And who the hell were going to be the stars the announcer was calling off? Well, whatever I was working on, I wrapped up close to midnight with an almost throbbing headache on the issue. Before going to bed that night, I took a shower with the song obviously replaying in my head from listening to too much of it. My brainstorm didn't end there though. Okay, it's a Fallout radio show styled like a 1940s one, and this is going to be the intro song. Now, what's that enthusiastic announcer gonna say? Then, after giving it some hard thought, it hit me. It's True Vault Escapades with Walter and Bunny. Tonight's episode, yada yada yada. It was the biggest sigh of relief I've had for all those weeks combined. I knew it had something there, and I just took the first steps. Now mind you, since this was on a whim, I had no clue where I got the name Bunny from. It just sort of sounded like a fitting nickname for some spunky retro counterpart for a series like this. In fact, I was juggling whether or not to name her Bunny or Kitty. For some reason, real-world names just wouldn't cut it for me with this girl, so Bunny it remained. Walter came easy, as every 40s detective show needed a tough, trenchcoat-wearing investigator who was too smart for even the police department's own good. His image came easy since he somewhat embodied the mysterious stranger from the Fallout series. The name True Vault Escapades came to me so easy because there's a skill magazine in Fallout New Vegas called True Police Stories. so that was more of a direct inspiration. In that very same sitting, I already began picturing scenarios between this Walter and Bunny. Since the title alone obviously meant the show will take place in a vault, the show's original setting was planned to be in Fallout 3's Vault 101, 100 years before the events of the actual game. In the concept, Bunny plays the role of a lavish damsel who fears the extinction of her vault due to some domestic threat. She trusts no one inside, so she finds a way to contact the help of someone who has no ties to her fellow dwellers and solve the mystery with no bias in mind. Walter and Bunny would learn a lot about each other's vastly different worlds after nuclear war, and later fall for one another as they make harrowing feats to break the case. An interesting contrast as Walter lives as a hard-up caseman with a criminal history himself, and Bunny being a luxurious entertainer in Vault 101 who puts on expensive makeup and fur around her vault suit. This would later be scrapped as I honestly couldn't come up with anything major that would happen inside of Vault 101 that could even compare to what would happen a century later. Besides, why not just make my own vault somewhere different where I'd have more freedom with the lore? And, well, also maybe get it mentioned in future Fallout games. So I ended up moving the vault down to West Texas sometime before the events of New Vegas. The concept remained mostly the same, except I toned down Bunny's role as a lavish damsel and bumped her up as an undercover cop for her vault, Vault 54. This way, she and Walter could relate more on a professional level as they looked into the case. So since that was settled, I spent the better part of a few months typing away the official True Vault Escapades script. There were even times when I was in need of inspiration to keep my thoughts flowing, which is where Nick Carter, Master Detective, came in. It really started with me simply looking for any random old radio show online, but I ended up falling in love with this old serial along the way. There were a bunch of popular titles back in the day to listen to, but Nick Carter came in first in line for me. The basis was very similar. It followed Nick the detective and Patsy, his secretary, and Girl Friday, who tagged along in his murder mysteries around New York. The show ran from 1943 to 1955, so there was a lot of content to digest and gain inspiration from, and my own radio show got a lot of it from this series as I wrote it. Can I just say that Nick Carter doesn't get the spotlight it deserves? The franchise actually began 1 year before Sherlock Holmes, and in my opinion is way more interesting to listen to, but that's just me. Anyway, I had a pretty respected and quickly growing Fallout Instagram back then, and it was definitely the most responsive place in terms of public outreach for me. I asked my followers how they'd like something like this. It's related content and completely original. Thankfully, I got an all-positive reaction with a lot of "do it" and "go for it" and "OMG, can't wait." So that gave me the much-needed confidence to finish up the script, which turned out being 5 episodes. I got some incredible art made, collected an oldie soundtrack and sound effects, but that wasn't the hard part. Casting these colorful characters was a small concern in the early portions of the series, and something I believed would be an easier process once I crossed that bridge. I was wrong. Oh boy, was I wrong. So originally my plan was to put out a ragtag casting call on my aforementioned Instagram page. It was full of Fallout fans eager for new content and just as excited for Fallout 4 as I was. In fact, the original idea was to get it out before the game was the main focus. Luckily, I received a ton of responses with folks ready to be cast as Walter or Bunny, or any of the supporting characters. But even though I asked for at least mildly decent microphone quality, the majority of the auditions were riddled with static, mic pops, and generally the quality you'd hear from a 2006 YouTube video. If not that, a few handfuls of auditions came from kids that sounded no older than 13. It was a huge facepalm moment. I actually have a group of some of these files saved on my old PC that would make for a pretty hilarious video, but the cringe would be far too high. I wasn't asking for much here, nor was I expecting Al Pacino type acting. It was just going to be a fun and interesting little fan creation that called for just a little bit of microphone quality. The cast was intentionally written very tightly because I didn't want to juggle with such a high volume of characters so early on. I wrote it just so it was big enough to handle. Looking back, I'm very glad I did. By the time all this was underway, it was somewhere in the middle of 2015 where Fallout 4 had officially been announced. And though I was excited, the estimated time of this show's release felt like it was thinning. Audition submissions slowed way down, and each post regarding True Vault Escapades was sometimes met with, "Hey, when is this show supposed to come out?" I couldn't help but agree because I was basically asking myself the same question. "Still working on it," I said. At this point in time, I had decided to cast Eric Huffman as Walter and Amy Harris as Bunny. There was no competition to compare these two to. They each had the vocal range I was looking for, and the mic quality was more than decent. So as they were hammering away at those lines, I made the search for who to fill the other parts of the cast. However, this time I needed speed, so on a whim I actually reached out to Shoddycast, relevantly the makers of Fallout lore, to see if they could get me in contact with Fallout lore's mysterious host, the Storyteller. Since they were a reputable channel that surely had stricter deadlines than me, a voice like his would not only be convenient, but it would also ring familiar. Expecting denial or no response at all, I was surprised enough to get their blessing and immediately get in touch with him. The Storyteller, whom I credit as Can Kennan, loved the idea of the show and signed on as Vault 54's overseer. Great, that's a hell of a lot more progress made, and that only leaves a few more, much smaller roles to be completed. I reached out a little more and managed to do just that. With that wild ride seemingly over, more time was flushed down the drain as the general recording process took a tremendous amount of time. Irony really played a huge role in this show, as even though I had no deadline issues with the main cast, a lot, and I do mean a lot, of time was taken up simply reminding the majority of the supporting cast to stay focused. There was a plan to submit lines for each episode on a weekly basis, but that simply didn't happen. I get headaches just reminiscing on the emails I would send when no recordings were sent to me. Some of these folks seemed relatively excited to take part in such a project, but the flame must have died out sometime in between, because whole episodes were held back on the editing phase simply because a character in one scene had a voice actor who was a no-show. I remember sending email after email as the week stacked up and time ran low, either to get total radio silence or a late reply that said, "Oh crap dude, so sorry, completely forgot about this, we'll get those out to you tomorrow, again, so sorry." So, pop quiz, what do you think was in my inbox tomorrow? Yup, absolutely nothing. Now to be fair, sometimes these folks really did forget to record, and they'd get it out to me later. That's no harm, no foul. But when I say most completely went dead on me, I do mean most. So a lot of recasting was done just when I thought the fiasco was over. This was kind of a foreshadow because this pattern of unreliability spanned all the way to even more recent productions of mine. Anyway, I got a hold of a solid cast, and after a lot of counting the cracks on the wall, the recordings of each and every character was sent to me, which meant it was time to edit the whole thing. Mind you, I had already begun the process with the finished scenes I had, so at this point I was just filling in the half I was waiting to be recorded. It's a good thing to note that this was before I was aware that people who usually do this sort of thing with voice actors ask them to send in their voice files either separately or in one big recording. They also request voice actors to send their files either in WAV or MP3 format. So dealing with all the different files was a cluster of confusion. Mic qualities were different, file types were different. But the thing that was going to bring it all together was going to be the vinyl grain sound effects and radio filter I slapped over each episode, which brings it all into a similar 1940s quality. It all came together quite beautifully, so what was next? Well, with those files all in one place now, I fired up Sony Vegas 13 and began the long process of matching the original script and the finished audio. How'd that work? Simple. Walter says something, I put the Walter file in the editor. Bunny replies to him, I just drop Bunny's file right after his, and so on with the rest of the script. Hunting down the quote-unquote original soundtrack to provide the scene transitions and background music was almost like going out hunting for a rare animal. I scoured the web for old movie trailers that had uninterrupted instrumental scores that I could clip out and place within the show. It was difficult because not every trailer gave you an instrumental long enough to be worth your time. Usually pre-1960s trailers started with the title, followed by a brief scene, small instrumental, and then another brief scene. Narrators and movie trailers didn't come until later in the game, it seems. Still, it was difficult. I came across some hitches along the way, you know, mispronounced names, maybe an actor skipped a page, or something I needed to edit last minute. But in the end, we got all 5 shows made. The 40s vibe was on point, and a pretty darn original story within the Fallout universe was made. All things were quite peachy for my first production of, well, anything. Except, it was mid-2016. Fallout 4 had been out for almost 10 whole months now. Obviously, this was eons late to what I was hoping for. Okay, so maybe this wasn't all bad. Fallout 4 had already settled in quite cozy at this point, and even though the title remained red hot, I bet a little extra content on the side called for fan attention. I mean, I was going to advertise it anyway, so it didn't really matter. Whenever I finished the show was of course going to be the time I plugged it. Best I could do was keep my fingers crossed. I can't begin to tell you the amount of excitement I had for the release of this show. What began as a random burst of inspiration was finally coming to life, and no matter how good or bad my creation might sound in the end, it's still such a fulfilling moment in my creative career. But I won't lie to you, the initial impact of my announcement for the official release of the show gave me a hint of disappointment. Remember before when I wanted the general public's thoughts on the idea and got a bunch of OMGs, yes, do it, and wouldn't it be awesomes? Yeah, not the case this time. I don't know, I just didn't see anything even close to the response I had when I made the initial post. Hardly a comment, maybe a fraction of the likes, and that was that. I hate to sound whiny when I say that, but it was a factor worth pointing out at the time, and I definitely didn't want that to reflect the actual show. So, how did they end up doing in the end, Atomic? Well, as each episode came out in their weekly schedule, I always kept a close eye on how the last one was doing. Being frank though, it was a slow growth for all 5. Number 1 always being its most popular, the rest each followed consecutively, but never crossing episode 1 speed. I mean, that's okay, it was my first bit of narrative content if you don't include my old Bioshock one, and who knows, maybe True Vault Escapades was gonna end up like one of those things that age like a fine wine. Perhaps momentum wouldn't come till YouTube's strange algorithm made it more noticeable down the line. If not that, then, well, maybe the entire platform of audio drama was just out of the question for the modern audience. That can't be true though, right? There's audio drama of some form on YouTube with views damn near the same number as the planet's age, right? Maybe True Vault Escapades, a mixture of Fallout and the old world, was just a strange medium for the gaming community to get a grip on. But hey, this subject alone is on the views, and despite all I just said, views are actually a very small factor I care about. It's the comments. It's interesting, right? So many people, hell, the majority of people do what they do on the internet for views, more than anything. Sometimes people like to stir controversy or get noticed in something, but that's really not me. If there's one interesting thing that grants my high, it's comments. I love communicating with those who view my content. I love generating a reaction. I love having chats with my audience about the story and characters. Because what's a view count when you can literally mingle with people who enjoyed your work enough to leave their thoughts? On that note, I think I got a decent amount of that over time, and it was fun. Heck, Wade K. Savage, the director of the immensely popular Fallout fan film Lanius, even dropped a comment. Mashing up all 5 episodes together in order equals to 2 hours and 37 minutes. Adding up each of their view counts at the time of recording this video totals to exactly 15,720 views. To those who really loved it and are now hearing this, it may come as a surprise, but honestly, not bad for a first real production. Everyone did a good job and I take a lot of pride in it. I mean, look, here I am making a whole video about it. As many of my subscribers know, the story didn't end there though. True Vault Escapades ended on one of those notes that could either end on the spot or leave room for continuations. So I continued it. Sometime later, the show got 2 spin-offs that focused on Walter and Bunny separately after the events of True Vault Escapades, Bunny's spin-off even introducing new characters voiced by my friends and YouTubers, Mr. Matty Plays and Spazzy W. Then the series' first visual adaptation followed. It was the last standalone spin-off following Walter, filmed entirely in Fallout 4 as Deadstone. It was filmed by one of the voice actors in the original series who's in charge of the Bubbles Gaming channel. This was an interesting adaptation, and part of what I believed was a part of why True Vault Escapades performed a little poorer than I expected. Can you guess? Yep, because it was visual. You could see it. There's no way modern attention spans were going to give the light of day to a radio show over an actual movie. So Deadstone was rising way faster than anything I've written for. Bubbles Gaming and I were very proud of what we put together, until YouTube took it down for some bogus ambient track that some record company claimed was theirs. It sucked, and it stayed off the channel for over 2 whole years. To be honest, I was frightened to contest the claim because I've never seen YouTube just yank a video off the web, and I felt it might result in a strike or something, so I played it safe. Luckily, and more recently, I discovered the option to just simply mute the part of the movie that contained the track, and was quickly able to unfreeze it from time like the sole survivor. So please, go watch it if you haven't. This modern radio show journey didn't end here though. I still felt the love of Walter and Bunny's story, and I couldn't just put a stop to it when the getting was good. After an OG series of 3 spin-offs later, oh, and my Bioshock show, the story of True Vault Escapades would then evolve into The Strip. The strip was my second attempt at getting the incredible journey of Walter and Bunny out to the Fallout community and the public eye in general. The detective duo plus Dusty, Mr. Matty's character, leave the Texas Commonwealth due to the enemies they've made there and settle down in pre-game New Vegas, just some time before Benny shoots the courier in Good Springs. Mr. House deputizes them so that they can police around his city legally, and the pair remodels a desert shack to act as their detective agency. Eric Huffman remained as Walter's voice actor throughout the entirety of this saga, while Amy Harris continued as Bunny until episode 6, when Sharon Grunwald picked it up afterwards. A few other voices from the previous installments returned as well as new ones, most notably the shoddy cast storyteller voice actor Can Kennan, who took the role of Lieutenant Humphreys, an Irish NCR soldier with a hard-headed attitude and a by-the-books way of handling things. This was a match made in heaven since Walter and Bunny were pretty anti-by-the-books. This new series was very different compared to True Vault Escapades, where instead of following a list of episodes all connected to one story, the strip was more like a radio serial where each episode was a different story. Remember when I said the Walter and Bunny series took a lot of inspiration from the real-life Nick Carter show? Well, the strip put more of a magnifying glass on that aspect. The entire setup of the show resembled that of Nick's adventures, and I even used the show's organ transitions as the strip's transitions. It was a hell of a lot easier to use than the old movie trailer music from before. Unlike True Vault Escapades, the strip had unique artwork made for each specific episode, and a few special guest stars appeared in the series. Ryan Alosio, who famously played Deacon in Fallout 4, came on board, and Lane Compton, who played John Donovan from Mafia 3, joined as well. Familiar characters from the New Vegas cast appeared as well, obviously recreated with different voice actors. Colonel Shu, Benny, and the King, only to name a few. Walter and Bunny's travels consisted of 2 seasons in New Vegas, which equals 20 full episodes of post-war mystery madness. All of this kicking off with that death-defying adventure in Vault 54. Now, if you've stuck around for this long, here's a detail about this whole thing I didn't even know until a few months ago. Remember the view count for the original 5 episodes of True Vault Escapades? That was 15,720 views if calculated all together. Again, that's just 5 episodes from more than 3 years ago. So one would obviously think that the strip, with 20 separate unique episodes, would have more, right? Nope. After just recently adding them together, all 20 episodes of the strip add up to 10,314 views. I won't lie. After all that grinding, along with getting original artwork, special guests, and better audio quality, I feel creative disappointment is more warranted here than in the first series. Promotion was pushed to its limits, words were spread, and steps were taken to get the show more attention in full force. But at the end of the day, it seems the results speak for themselves. Now, there could be a multitude of reasons either of these series didn't strike the right chord. Maybe I promoted them wrong. Maybe I just didn't have the following to reach out to enough people. But one thing I truly wish wasn't true was that maybe there really is no such thing as a large audience for audio narratives anymore. Sure, podcasts are all the rage nowadays, but those don't tell stories. They're just modern renditions of radio talk shows. But hey, I could still be totally wrong. Here is a fact I do know, however. At the point in time I was promoting each new episode of the strip on my Instagram, which was getting close to brushing 40,000 followers at the time, those posts in particular performed extremely low compared to anything else I had on my page. Post a dead Fallout meme from 6 years ago, you're looking at 5,000 or more likes with a countless amount of comments. Post something with original content like the strip, and I'm looking at, and this is not an exaggeration, 200 to 300 likes with no comments. I'm serious, people, I can't make this stuff up. What in the world could be the mystery to all this? Well, after all the trial and tribulation, I have no clue whatsoever. But enough of the headache. I still met a lot of people who commented and shared their thoughts with the series, and it sort of assembled a small but close-knit fan base for the show. For that, I'm really thankful. At the end of the day, I think this neat little saga is an incredible example of how music can be the cause for inspiration. We've all known this for a while as humans, but to experience it yourself is like getting the biggest energy shot you can think of, all the way back in health class in 2014. A class I should have taken freshman year, but due to a scheduling mistake, they placed me there senior year. I heard that Charlie Spivak song, and it then turned into a brainstorm. That then turned into the story of Walter and Bunny. Basically a mixture of my love of Fallout and early to mid 20th century stuff, which games like Fallout inspired. I fell so in love with the 1944 single that I went as far as purchasing the original vinyl 78 on eBay, oh, and the Woody Herman version too. Even though I didn't exactly predict the agonizing and sometimes unnecessary struggle that came with producing this series, I had basically planted a stake in my mind that said it had to be done, despite the obstacles to come. Sure, it didn't come out before Fallout 4 like I had originally planned, I didn't expect the frustrating casting process, nor did I enjoy the strenuous Sony Vegas editing, but as I said, it was a labor of love. If I had the means, if I had the money, I would assemble a cast to create an actual movie adaptation of the show, but I can't see that happening anytime soon. But can you imagine? Sure, Walter and Bunny could have a fan film with all the modern touches, but picture something like a Walter and Bunny movie filmed entirely through a 1950s camera, full of transatlantic accents, vintage-style fight scenes, and an old-world flair to it. To me, either would be awesome. There's actually a Fallout fan film called Desolation Angels that added True Vault Escapades as a little Easter egg during a scene in a bar folks don't know about. That's definitely the closest thing to a live adaptation it's ever come to, but it was sweet to hear it in one. Either that or the incredible cosplay Dominique DeLeon did of Bunny a couple years ago. Paid $30 for that wig I did, so I guess the final thing I can leave you off with is that my work on audio drama isn't over, even after all that. Some of you know there's an incredible new BioShock one close to being done, and I'm even chipping away at a movie-length sequel for Walter and Bunny. Emphasis on the word chipping, since I'm not riding up a storm here. I'm pretty busy trying to keep real life in order, and despite all the creative improvements, these shows are still one mighty bitch to put together. Hopefully one day, I can make these creations with a little more ease, or perhaps even provide something for you to actually watch one day. But until then, I'll keep working on what I have in the works and search for new and different ways to bring in creative content. Before I go, I wanted to extend the hugest thank you to my first and only 2 patrons on my newly opened Patreon. Michelle and Ola Clear have my deepest gratitude. If anyone else wants to support my oldie station or anything I do here on YouTube, a link should pop up right about here. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this little story and now maybe have more of an understanding of how making a modern radio show works, at least in my case. I'm Atomic Wolf, and I'll see you next time.